two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Annika Rowland. She's a member of the Ithaca DSA EcoSocialism Committee, and we're going to talk both about that committee and I think about ecosocialism in general. While Ithaca DSA has been around since 1981, committees are, in general, a newer thing, and certainly it's a new set of committees that we have these years, let's say. But perhaps you could tell us a little about the history of Ithaca DSA's Eco-Socialism Committee. So go ahead, Annika.
So the history of the committee, I don't know all the way back to 1980, but I do know that the committee started to be developed when, a lot of the concerns about climate change started gearing up in the mid 2010s, I think is when the public consciousness really started to focus on this issue. And then when I moved to Ithaca, there was an active eco-socialism group working on a lot of cool stuff that I immediately joined. I got to be the chair of eco-socialism about 2 years ago, and so that was really exciting. And then, of course, last year I was chair of the Ithaca DSA as a whole, and now I have returned to eco-socialism as a general guiding member, and we are revamping what we would like to focus on as a committee after a brief hiatus last year.
So what are you doing, Annika? I mean, what is as a committee?
Yeah, it's a great question, Theresa. So just to provide some context into why we are looking at new things, the FreeCAT campaign actually came out of the Eco-Socialism Committee. So the FreeCAT campaign was a campaign that Ithaca DSA was working on for a while, a few years ago, which transitioned into the Make Cornell Pay campaign. So that was really focused around free and accessible transportation, and then merging into Make Cornell Pay. So that just gives all of the history there about the Eco-Socialism Committee. And now we are focusing on a lot of food access issues, food sovereignty, very focused around this idea of food resilience as climate resilience. We are also interested in a lot of the public policy that's going on around eco-socialism, such as the New York State Build Public Renewables Act and the New York Heat Act. So lots of stuff is going on.
So maybe for a start, say a little more about what specifically you are doing around food.
Great question. We have a lot of different projects that we are working on. I think the longest standing one is this idea of growing fruit and nut trees that are locally adapted to the climate in our area, and then distributing local fruit and nut trees to members of our community, tree seedlings, so that people can plant trees that will, have a longevity that can provide food for people as we go through the climate crisis. So where that started was building these really cool contraptions called raised air pruning beds. Basically, what it is that you plant a fruit or nut tree seed in like a raised bed structure. And the tree, when it starts developing its taproot, starts developing lateral roots rather than a deep taproot. This is a lot of plant talk, but basically the point is that we grew probably over 200 chestnut tree saplings last year in these beds, and they are currently overwintering. But we are planning to distribute them to local community members at an upcoming event very soon. So that's one piece of the puzzle. There's lots of other stuff I could go on and talk about.
Well, in fact, why don't you, Annika?
Okay, thanks, Theresa. We also, so Michael and Julianne Watson are the current co-chairs of the EcoSocialist group, and they have a great property up in Danby where they are establishing an Ithaca DSA community garden. So last year, Michael and Julianne grew a few different crops in this garden, including cabbage, and the cabbage and garlic was harvested and then delivered to local food organizations that distribute food to people who are in need. So we plan to do that again this year, and we're currently thinking about what crops we would like to plant in the community garden. We're thinking kale, maybe some tomatoes and peppers, onions and garlic. So we're really getting that ramped up to distribute some food, and also talks about creating some events involved in canning food, preserving food, just thinking about how we can be more sustainable with the food that we eat.
Preserving, does that include drying?
Yeah, I think we're thinking about drying. We're also thinking about maybe like a tomato canning event at the end of the summer when a lot of tomatoes are really ripe, or a kimchi making event as well. So making kimchi or sauerkraut out of different types of cabbages, and fermenting the food there for preservation.
Sounds like fun. Sounds like getting some, maybe having a picnic too.
Yeah, totally. We're all about being outside and eating food in Ithaca EcoSocialism. So I think that could definitely be arranged.
Cool. Now, you also mentioned the committee getting behind a couple of state bills.
Yeah. There are a few members in our group that are particularly interested in the state bills that have been in the works for a little bit. We've had a few informal discussions about the New York State Build Public Renewables Act. I also was a little bit involved in working with some members from the Hudson Valley who came to Ithaca and spoke about this act on the Commons. I believe that was last November. There's that. And then I believe that some of our members even went up to Albany a few weeks ago to do some advocating for the New York Heat Act, which is the New York Home Energy Affordable Transition.
Cool. So well, Annika Rowland, can you say a little more about the Heat Act? What it is, since it's still a question, apparently.
Yeah, of course. So the Heat Act is basically trying to limit this requirement that sometimes when you sign up for utilities where you're obligated to sign up for gas. And so it's basically giving customers the option to choose cleaner energy and kind of reduce the expansion of the gas infrastructure in New York State. So yeah, it's still going through the I believe it is still going through the Senate, but it's gaining a lot of traction in Albany as there was a big push up there a few weeks ago, just with a lot of local groups going up to advocate for the bill.
Sounds cool. I don't think I even heard about that, but
Yeah, it was definitely a last minute thing, as a lot of things are, but there was a lot of cool stuff going on.
well, other cool legislation that I happen to know about is the green social housing measure.
Mm,
The idea of building publicly financed housing, probably with, social housing, which means with a lot of tenant input into how
hmm
it's run, uh, and, doing it to green standards. This is a
Right.
rather new measure in Albany. I think there are some DSA chapters elsewhere that have been instrumental in pushing it. Uh, and here in Ithaca, the housing advocates were just getting around to saying, well, what we really need is social housing.
I agree with you there.
Um, to get super technical, by the way, it it updates the old measure that was called Mitchell-Lama,
Okay.
uh, which,
I have not heard of that.
oh, there are a lot of large developments in mostly in New York City, a few in other places, none in Ithaca. Um, you may have heard of Co-op City in the Bronx.
Yes, I have heard of that.
Yes. Okay, that's probably the biggest example. But anyway, it involved state money going into building mixed income housing. I have
Gotcha.
I have friends who live in Mitchell-Lama buildings.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm interested, Teresa, because I've heard a lot about green social affordable housing um, more in Europe, and now I'm turning the question on you. But didn't you go to a certain city last year where you might have learned more about the social housing?
Yes, well, actually, most of my learning came on an earlier trip, but
Okay.
I go back to Vienna frequently, but
hmm
partly because that's the old family home, and I still
hmm
have some by now distant relatives there.
hmm
Um,
Do you think
but
that there's
within
anything to learn
oh, there's a lot to learn. There
from
within
the housing there? Yeah.
oh yeah. But actually it has become very well known in New York State, and New York State housing activists led a whole delegation to Vienna about 2 years ago. Uh, a delegation that included our assembly member Anna Callis.
Very cool.
So yeah, so and it is definitely, I mean, there was a New York Times article, I think Times Magazine article about Vienna and uh, its social housing projects that are now 100 years old and still going strong and still desirable places to live.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
yeah, and I mean, you go around Vienna and here and there you'll see buildings, and if you can read German, you can read that they're public, built by the municipality of Vienna, including some really
Wow.
architecturally interesting stuff.
Wow, very cool.
Now, okay, there are a few other trends that maybe fit in, whether or not the committee is doing anything, I don't know. But for one thing, Annika Rowland, You say you know something about agrivoltaics.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I was introduced to when I was doing my graduate degree up at Cornell. But I used to do some field research that was right next to an agrivoltaics field. So for those listening who don't know, it's difficult to pronounce. Agrovoltaics is when you have solar panels, and underneath the solar panels, you can either graze animals, that's typically the case, or you can grow different types of crops. And so in this case, I often saw sheep grazing underneath the solar panels. So this is, I think that this is gaining traction because it's a very efficient use of space where you are capturing energy from the sun, renewable energy, but also the space works as a home or a grazing area or another way to produce a good from the ground. So I know, Theresa, that you had mentioned that there might be a bill going through. I haven't heard of this bill, but maybe you could tell me a bit more about it so I could bring it to the Eco-Socialism Committee.
Well, actually, I heard about it from Anna Kellis, and I believe
Mm.
she introduced it, and I I think it passed. Um, and the idea is there would be state money to, you know, to fund the research.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, then it's probably the field that I saw when I was doing my research at Cornell is probably one of the funded operations. That's
Oh,
very cool.
that may not be quite the way the timing goes. I think the field you saw may have been a bit before the bill passed, but
Uh, well, it probably helped it pass. But yeah, I think it's also great to have um, a bill that puts money into this program because that way a farmer doesn't have to compromise any of their land and try something out that they might not be comfortable with. I think in general, my perspectives of agriculture and different trying new things with different research, it's always best to do it on a research farm so you don't have to compromise the ability of the farmer to make a profit. So it's very exciting.
right. You were saying possibly growing things under solar panels, and I'm wondering what would grow under a solar panel.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that establishing like pollinator gardens for different types of pollinators is something that is being looked into. You know, a lot of solar panels move their direction over the course of the day, depending on where the sun is. So different parts underneath the panels get exposure to sun throughout the day. So definitely plants that don't require a full 12 hours of sun are the best suited. But yeah, I think it's generally non-edible for humans, non-edible plants, but other beneficial plants to the biodiversity of the system.
Yeah, well, I've heard of shade-grown coffee, being advertised as such, but coffee obviously doesn't grow here.
Correct. Yes, it would need to be much hotter, which hopefully it doesn't
Not
get that
yet.
much hotter here in Ithaca.
I seem to remember something about lettuce doing better, not doing well when it gets too much sun.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because it has a high water content, lettuce tends to wilt more easily in high sun and high heat. Um, yeah, I actually worked at a local organic farm in the Finger Lakes last year where I learned a lot about these ecological principles that I'm talking about. And I think one of the reasons why I've stayed in going back to the eco-socialism group is that a lot of ecological resilience principles, there's a lot of overlap with socialist thinking. Um, and one of those major examples would be permaculture, which is becoming really well known now, I think, more well known. But permaculture is basically this idea of being like in harmony with our natural world, where you care for the earth, but you also care for the people, and make sure that everyone has equal access to the earth and the environment, which I think can be connected to socialism in that way. It's important to note that permaculture originates from a lot of indigenous practices, or practices that have always been around in different countries, for example, in Latin America. So we're really learning from those people when we talk about this type of stuff. But yeah, I think that that's an important part to mention when we're talking about eco-socialism.
Yeah, I seem to remember that it involves some sort of a triple bottom line.
Yeah, I think that what I tend to hear about is that it's like you care for the earth, you care for the people, and you care for like society, or that everyone gets their fair share, which is how I've heard it. Obviously, I think there's a lot of different ways that people describe it, but
Yeah, I think there
yeah,
was something
yeah,
like when you produce enough to sell, the money doesn't just go to the bank, but it goes to people and the land.
correct. Yeah, that's a big part of it. The recycling of all types of um, outputs, I guess you could say, the recycling of nutrients, of food, of money, and labor, I think is important. Um, you know, especially where we live in Ithaca, the the summer, the late spring, and the early fall are times where people are really working hard if they're working on farms or other earth related activities. And then there's kind of this cycle of working really hard during that part of the year, and then taking it easy during the winter, and resting more. And I think that's a big part of it as well, kind of removing ourselves from the capitalist ideas of needing to work and be productive all the time. So that's also included in permaculture, or eco-socialism, I would say.
Vacations.
Yeah, and body rest, and taking it easy. Yeah, I think that at least that's what I've experienced as someone who has worked on farms during the summer, and taken more of a rest during the winter.
Well, that's right. This winter you took a big trip.
Yes, I did. I got to go learn from a lot of different people in Southeast Asia. Actually, they have really cool agricultural practices out there. So that was awesome to learn about. And I even probably the highlight was visiting Vietnam, which obviously has a really um terrifying history with the United States, but it was cool because Vietnam is considered a socialist republic. And so learning about how socialism is implemented in that country was a very fascinating experience as well.
I mean, we have a couple of minutes left. Can you say anything about it? How it's implemented,
Yeah, I
especially
would say that in
agriculturally?
general, yeah, I think in general, the government is really great at allocating land to everyone who seeks to farm on land or otherwise. Um, Most people there have their own area where they can farm and produce their own food, or they have really their access to food is it's a very close-knit system where any vegetables that are harvested from fields are brought in that morning to the city, and then people buy them right then and there. The whole idea of like having a big grocery store wasn't really I didn't observe any of that while I was there. Of course, I was only there for a few weeks, but I think their food pathways are much more much closer than they might be in the United States.
So, so that would be saying local farmers markets rather than large supermarkets.
Correct. All local farmers markets. Yes.
Well, Ithaca has a farmers market too, and
Ithaca does, and I think that our farmers market is probably one of the best. I mean, obviously, I love Ithaca, but I think that we have so many options to choose from at the farmers market, and it's a big community thing, which makes Ithaca, to me, feel very green and sustainable, among everything else.
yeah, I go every week or almost every
Did you go
week.
yesterday, Theresa?
Oh, yes.
Yesterday was the first day of the Saturday market.
Well, the first day of the downtown market.
Oh,
because
okay.
there was the winter market out at Triphammer Mall
Right.
in
I always
January,
forget about that
February,
one.
and March. Oh, I
Mhm.
like that. I mean, that one's great for me because I can get there on the number 30 bus. Talk about TCAT.
Perfect. Talk about TCAT. That's great.
But I must say, this year has been not so great.
Mm.
No apples. I mean,
Yeah, so
apples sold out very fast.
last year we had a frost in late May, which never happens in this area of the country. And that frost killed all of the buds of the apple trees and the peach trees for that matter. And so we had a very, very low apple crop last year. So hopefully that doesn't happen again this year. But you know, the climate has been, as we all know, it's been changing a lot. So it's hard to predict.
Well, I don't think actually, I think frosts late in May are okay, an occasional tradition in this area. I don't
Okay.
think that was anything new. Well, thank you, Annika Rowland. This has been great. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 3.